conversation is just to get a sense of the current environment in the natural and mineral resources sector of Egypt, but also to get a sense of where things are coming from and where they're going. So perhaps to start the conversation here, the last year has been incredibly busy for the Arab Republic of Egypt, specifically in the reform space. Talk to us about some of the key reforms, both in policy, legislation, and direction that you think are important to highlight.
Very good. So first of all, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And first of all, I would really like to thank His Excellency Honorable Minister Gwede Mantashe, right, for the invitation and for holding such an important and rich conference, bringing the world together, right, and really putting the focus on Africa mining. So I'm very, very appreciative for that, and it's a great pleasure, for Egypt to be in Indaba 2025. When you're looking on the mining sector in Egypt, it is a sector which has lots of opportunity, and it's a sector which goes back to thousands of years. If you look in terms from the times of the pharaohs, and the gold has been used, as a key, mineral resources. If you look at the jewelry, that has been done, a lot of other, various sources, right, of minerals, right, have been used. So just to say that, the mining sector in Egypt has really a very rich history. Now, when you look in terms on what the mining sector represents today in our GDP, it is only 1% of the GDP. And that gives you really kind of a signal that there is a huge opportunity for growth in this mining sector, where we would really like to make sure that we put all the the reforms in place to get it up to 5 or 6% as a percent of our GDP. And this is why, we've put in a very important, let's say, focus on reforms, and to ask ourselves what is required for this to happen. And when you look at this, you have to start by contextualizing that Egypt as a country has all it takes to be able to become actually a major hub in the mining sector, because of its geographical, location, right, in the top corner of Africa. So, kind of a bridge between Africa, Europe, the Middle East. The infrastructure, that exists in Egypt in terms on the roads, ports, railways, shipping lanes exist. If you look in terms on the capability, in terms on skill sets, again, we have 110 million, fellow Egyptians, who have skill sets to be able to deliver tier 1, mines. And I'm saying this not based on, on my own, let's say, evaluation, but when we look at the Sukari gold mine, which is now a partnership, with Egypt, before we sent them in, and now with Anglo Gold, is really a true testament of the capabilities which exist. And hence, what parts that we were missing were really to look in terms of how we can increase the number of juniors, activity for exploration, and how we can attract, majors into the exploitation, and to be able to not only have one Sukari gold mine, but to have many, tier 1 type of mines, right, in the country. And for us to be able to look in terms of what does it take for this to happen, we really quickly identified that we had to work on 2 main streams, for this to take place. One of it had to do with, first of all, how do we showcase what is it that we have, right? How do we make available to future investors in terms on the potential that Egypt holds? And on this, maybe just very briefly now, or maybe we can discuss a bit later, but the focus on having a digital platform to be able to do that was something which is very important, for us to do. The second aspect was looking in terms on the regulatory frameworks to ensure that the regulatory frameworks for exploitation of gold, for example, are such that they are making Egypt a very competitive destination for gold mining, both from exploration and exploitation. And again, we can discuss a bit more what we did there. And then the third element on these reforms is looking at how do we look at our mining regulatory authority to be able to equip it with all the tools that it needs to be able to better support existing investors in Egypt and future investors in Egypt, by increasing its capabilities to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And that, again, we can
the juniors that you're hoping to attract into exploration, have they found the regulatory adjustments to be favorable, and are you seeing activity coming in?
So what we've seen is, so far, the junior companies, essentially, they need a few things. They need, number one, let's say, an ease of getting access to licenses, right, to be able to operate. They need to be able to have, sources of funding and ability to raise, additional funds. And they need to also have a pathway of being able to monetize, let's say, the successful outcomes, right, of their exploration activity. So when you look at those three different elements, the first one, in terms of today ability to have access to license that exists, and juniors have access to that, we are, working to make that even much easier by making sure that we have, more number of rounds, right, of bid rounds, or even ability to be able to have, open type of bid rounds and so forth that we will be looking at. The second aspect, in terms on how do we help the juniors to be able to really have access to financing, it was very important for us to look at what happens after the exploration. After exploration, going to exploitation. So by adjusting our exploitation agreement framework to be more competitive and aligned with really top tier, countries who are successful in mining, then we provide an avenue for the juniors to be able to attract more financing, knowing that ability to get an tier one or a global major company for exploitation would materialize. And this is why we have worked in collaboration with global companies actually, such as Barrick Gold, with Anglo Gold, Shanti and Centamin before, in terms on what is it that our exploitation agreement would need to look like to be able to be conducive to more inflow of investment into the country. And in December of last year, so December 2024, we have actually reached a model whereby we initialized together that if we are able to deploy this model in the country and finalize parliamentary approvals, that model would actually entice major companies to invest more in Egypt. And by virtue of that, that will help the juniors to be able to attract more funding, knowing that they will have an easier ability to have majors to be able to take on their leases for exploitation.
When you started speaking to me, you highlighted some of the geographical strategic value placement of Egypt, given its port accessibility and the various supports around that. You talk about increasing the contribution to the economy from 1% to about 5-6%.
Yes.
And a few years ago, you spoke about specifically focusing on exports, taking that from a $1.6 billion export market to about $10 billion. Specifically around juniors and some of the partnerships you're talking about right now. Is the regulatory framework adjustments geared in such a way that it gives them an export advantage? And do they have those relationships, or is this the gathering where those relationships are being built?
So just a small clarification, a year ago I wasn't here. So I didn't mention anything a year ago, I started on the 3rd of July. But we are very much committed actually to increasing the, not only the exports. What we are really kind of working towards is making Egypt much more investable in the mining sector, both from a raw material, perspective, but also in terms on how we can also help our partners create value-added products, in Egypt to be able to actually provide for the African market, for the local market, or for the external market. So essentially, the theme is really how do we make Egypt more investable in the mining sector, and looking at the fundamentals, which are really required for this to happen. You really look in terms on how we can make leases available and all the regulatory framework to be very efficient, right, for our partners. So essentially to help them succeed. And I always say that the success of our partners is our success. And I always talk about, for them to help us, because at the end of the day, it is not an either or, scenario. It's really a complementary scenario for us to be able to unlock those riches and really help the local communities, help, job creation, but also help create shareholder value, whether for international investors, whether for Egyptian investors, or obviously African investors, right, in Egypt.
The difficulty that developing markets across the world are facing is, as it grows, it contends with difficult balances, such as considering its own development against environmental impacts and environmental protection, and finding that particular balance. As a growing market, how have you been finding that particular contestation between the environment versus its development?
So on this one, I would say it is not an either or. And this is something that for me, when I look at the priorities, that we have in the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources, I always talk about, a fifth pillar, which is around the health, safety, environment, climate action, right?
Yeah.
And energy efficiency. Because for us, it is very important that we do this because it is the right thing to do, for all the people involved in the process and here in mining come, safely, right, to, for their operation, be able to go back to their families, safe. It is very important that we do the right thing to make sure that in the process of, unlocking the potential of these mineral resources, that we do that in an environmentally friendly way, so that we can also leave for future generation, a healthier, let's say, environment, for them to be able to benefit from. But I always add, in addition, that it is the right thing to do, it is also very important to be able to attract investment into the sector. And hence it is something that actually is important for us to integrate as part of the value chain, as part of our regulatory framework, and as part of also of our collaboration, right, with the various, entities to be able to deliver. And when you look at, is this possible? And is this possible in Egypt? The answer I have is absolutely yes, both in Egypt and, in the mining sector. And I have to say that I was fortunate to visit end of August the Sukari gold mine, which is now part of, let's say, the assets of AngloGold Ashanti. If you look at the Sukari gold mine, is a very good example of a tier one mine, which has world-class standards in terms on, environmental standards, in terms of energy efficiency, in terms on renewables, in terms on digital, in terms on, even, diversity, right, of the workforce working there, men and women, working, in the mines and in the various stages of the processes. So for us, it is very important. And we do have a very strong collaboration and partnership with the Ministry of Environment in Egypt. And again, this is where I always believe that for us to succeed, it is not really about, the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources on our own. It is really by a very strong collaboration with the rest of the members of the cabinet. And really, we have a very strong engagement with the Ministry of Environment to be able to work together in terms on what are the standards, right, for operations, right, in the mining sector. What are the different risk mitigations, that are required to be put in place, and so forth. And those are, as part of the requirements, right, that we have for our partners and that we're working together on.
Yeah. Sticking on energy, and the global trend is that as the world transitions to cleaner forms of energy, to commercialize that, they have to tap into critical minerals and countries are positioning their sectors to be able to respond to that demand and that need. Talk to us about the critical minerals positioning of Egypt in response to the global transition in energy. Is there a framework that you're looking at? Is there an investment case for those who are looking to explore and exploit in that space? And is that something that is finding momentum?
Yes. So critical mineral, I would maybe comment on a few things. Number one is related to the definition of critical minerals, because again, this is an area whereby you have critical minerals which are required for technologies, right, which are part of the energy transition and so forth. And then you have maybe other types of critical minerals which are critical for the economy and in terms of development and also job creations and so forth. So when I look at Egypt, we do have a big emphasis, on minerals such as, phosphate and so forth, and in terms of the importance, of those minerals for the local economy, but also creation of a local also industry, right? And value added products and derivatives that can benefit the local market and the international market and so forth. And then in terms on the other types of, let's say, I would call, critical minerals who are involved in the technologies, right, and so forth. What we are working on is to make sure that our regulatory framework are attractive for investment in those minerals, but at the same time, in terms on leveraging the digital capabilities to be able to make the visibility of what exists today, but also in terms on how we can work together to really be able to identify, further the potential, right, of those critical minerals in Egypt. And also to be able to look in terms and partnerships of how we can, again, not only look at the raw material itself, but in terms of the value proposition to be able to have local value added products. And we do have already, several projects in Egypt related to that in terms of, creating silicon, wafers and so forth, looking at, critical minerals and part of the value chain. So for us, we're looking at it on the whole value chain, and where Egypt can help our partners to really kind of deliver a value added, differentiated product, from the mineral resources, from the infrastructure and availability, and in terms of being able to deliver value added for the shareholders, for the people of Egypt, and for the continent.
In the last minute that we have, let's look ahead. 5 years from now, what will be the key milestones against which you will measure the Egyptian story in mining and petroleum resources?
Very good. So actually, if I visualize, in 5 years' time, definitely when we look at the contribution, right, of the mining sector in our GDP, right, this is where we need to be able to have reached this 1 to 5. And then in terms of on the ground, this is where, when I look at the number of junior companies, exploring in Egypt, we want to see as many junior companies as exist to be really operating in Egypt, because we have to remember that this is not transactional. This is a continuous, journey, and hence we have to keep on creating this environment to be attractive for junior companies and to really multiply and exponentially increase the number of junior companies in Egypt. And then I give you the example of the Sukari gold mine, that we have. 5 years down the line, we should be able to be talking about, more gold mines. I'm not going to tell you how much, because again, people will always remind me about the time it takes between exploration and really having a mine. But at least identifying, within the next 5 years, those potential future Sukari gold mines, should be definitely, in the more than a handful.
More than a handful. Yeah, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insights, for sharing with us what the vision is. I really do appreciate it, and all the best to you and the people of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
Thank you very much. I mean, I really appreciate the time and so forth. And if I leave everyone with just one key message is, Egypt is open for investment, right, in the mining sector, and we are here to help our partners succeed. And I will end with a quote that I started with: is that the success of our partners is our success, and essentially help us, and to have really an investable, opportunities in Egypt, leveraging its location and its infrastructure, and its people. So.